Hey, happy Wednesday morning to you, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Listen, do not forget, you just got to keep this in mind. July the 11th through the 13th, here in Ardmore, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. Our theme is how we know we're not living in the last days. This is going to be an absolutely great lectureship. Well, we're looking at the motif of the birth pangs of Messiah. When the disciples asked Jesus for a sign of the end of the age and of his parousia, Jesus said there will be famine, earthquake, pestilence, wars, rumors of wars. These are the beginning of birth pangs, but the end is not yet. Over the last several videos, I've been sharing with you about this motif of the birth pangs of Messiah. Now look, scholars have recognized this theme for forever. This is not a preterist invention. This is a thoroughly biblical concept. And the idea was the birth pangs of Messiah would be in the last generation of Israel, would lead, and by the way, Elijah would come first. So you'd have Elijah, the birth pangs of Messiah, leading to the Great Tribulation, and there are all sorts of different elements that would be synchronous as well. But the Great Tribulation would give rise to the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection. All of this within the last days, all of this within the last days of Israel, giving rise to the new covenant creation. Now, that alone ought to cue us in, folks. Really? Honestly. Now, in one of the most fantastic passages in the Old Testament, and this connection proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Matthew chapter 24 predicted in truth, I just got to tell you, I was stunned just recently on Facebook, on a Facebook page that is dedicated to supposedly refuting covenant eschatology. And I made the point that Matthew 24 is full of references to the resurrection. And some of the so-called experts on there responded by saying, where do you find the resurrection in Matthew 24? Well, they admit it's in Matthew 25, 31 and following. The great judgment, that's the resurrection. So the Olivet Discourse does contain resurrection. And yet here they were asking, where do you find the resurrection in the Olivet Discourse? I was literally blown away. Okay, all that. Well, let me show you why resurrection is in Matthew 24 and 25. In the book of Hosea, which is dealing with the time of the destruction of the 10 northern tribes, and their death and their future resurrection. Their death is described in Hosea chapter 13, 1 and 2. When Ephraim spoke, trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. Now, folks, this is not talking about the individual. This is talking about the corporate nation of Israel, the body of Israel. But when he, Ephraim, Israel, when he offended through Baal worship, he died. That's the corporate nation dying. Now they who? Israel. Israel, now they, Israel, who died, now they sin more and more. Now, folks, I think it's pretty obvious we're not talking about physical death here. I mean, when you die physically, you don't keep on sinning, right? Right. So here we have the death that is in view. The death that is the focus of the prediction that we're about to see. But watch this. In Hosea chapter 13, well, we'll start with verse 9. O Israel, you are destroyed. Well, they were killed. That's what he said in verse 1. You are destroyed, but your help is from me. I will be your king. Where is any other that he may save you in all of your cities, and your judges to whom you said, give me a king in sanctuary, or princes? I gave you a king in my anger. I took him away in my wrath. The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. His sin is stored up. Watch this. The sorrows of a woman in childbirth shall come upon him. He is an unwise son, for he would not stay long where children are born. This is Israel, the corporate body of Israel in labor pains. Verse 14. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. Well, what death is he talking about? It's not biological, physical death. He defines that death in verse 1 and 2 as alienation from God as a result of sin. It's not biological death. But again, notice, they are in birth pangs. The sorrows of a woman in childbirth shall come upon him. I will ransom them. Boy, that concept of ransom, through judgment, at the time of judgment, is incredibly powerful. Don't have time to develop it on today's video. But just go back and read Isaiah 43, 1 and 5, Isaiah 48, and see that concept of ransom and redemption. It'll blow your mind. Now, here is Israel that dies through sin. She is not dying physically. She is alienated from God, and judgment, national judgment, would come upon her. She would labor in childbirth. Isn't it interesting that Ephraim is a man, yet the labor pains of childbirth would come upon him? Yeah, mixing of metaphors if you please, but nonetheless it's right there. So here is Israel that is dead, who is alienated. He would go through the birth pangs, and resurrection would be the ransom. It would be the deliverance. Now, in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus said, there will be wars, rumors of wars. These are the beginning of the birth pangs. Well, listen, folks, if those events, if those wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famine, pestilence were the beginning of the birth pangs, then according to the Old Testament, what would the birth pangs give birth to? Resurrection. So when Jesus said that the birth pangs and the tribulation would be in his generation, that is tantamount to saying that the resurrection would be in that generation. And that means that you cannot divide Matthew chapter 24 into two different subjects. One, the fall of Jerusalem. The other, the so-called end of time and the resurrection of biological bodies. Hosea wasn't predicting the resurrection of biologically dead bodies. He was talking about the resurrection of those alienated from God due to sin, and their ransom being raised out of that kind of death. But the birth pangs would give birth to that resurrection. And thus, if you'll remember, in my discussion of 1 Corinthians 15, when I talked about Paul experiencing the persecutions everywhere he went, and that persecution, part of the birth pangs, what would those birth pangs give rise to? The kingdom and the resurrection, just like Hosea chapter 13. And again, that means you can't divide the Olivet Discourse into two different subjects. That means that when the disciples were asking about the parousia and the end of the age, that those birth pangs would give birth to the tribulation, which would lead directly to and bring in the parousia and the end of the age in that generation. You cannot insert a 2,000-year gap between the birth pangs, the tribulation, and the resurrection. That is a horribly anachronistic hermeneutic, and it is totally unjustified. It is, in fact, a perversion of the Scriptures. I discuss this at great length in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. And I'm sorry if that language was a little bit strong, but folks, we have to honor what the text says. I mean, you just can't go off willy-nilly and say, oh, well, yeah, birth pangs here and resurrection out there. No. There is a temporal connection between the two that cannot be violated without doing violence to the text. Anyway, go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. At the top of the page, there's a banner. Shows you how to order. This book is regularly $23.95 plus $4.95 shipping. For this month only, April 2019, total delivered price, $19.95. That'll save you almost $10. Thank you for those who have taken advantage of the offer already. Hey, folks, I'll see you on the flip side.